But so I just listened to you this week do a podcast with someone, or a Zoom webinar type thing, and I did not know that you did Hempilatiion,
Who
which
am I? Who am I?
you are, I
You know,
said there's going to be a fabulous intro about everything you
okay.
did, but you are Mr. Steve Bloom, former editor of High Times, former editor of Freedom Leaf, current editor of CelebStoner, all around cannabis activist and cool guy. Is that a sufficient recap?
Thank you. So at least people know what they're talking about when you bring up Hempilatiion.
Hempilatiion was to raise money for NORML. And I have had this since I was 16 years old, which was a really long time ago.
Giving up your age.
I know. Well, I don't know if you could still get these to see what year is on the back, although you probably search that.
1995.
All right, I don't like you anymore, Steve. I have to edit that.
People are doing the addition. They can figure that out.
No, it's lies. But yeah, I was a kid. I was in high school, and this was one of my favorite CDs. So I went through probably, I don't know, 5 years ago when we really just committed to like, I'm just streaming, and I purged all my CDs. I threw out, stacks and stacks, I kept my 5 or 6 favorite bands and anything with sentimental value. And this is one of the ones I hung on to because I'd be amazed if it played because I probably wore the whatever off it. But, that was the first time I heard like David Peel and some of whoever was on that. And great job. So just let's start there. Tell me about doing Hempilatiion.
I'm so proud of Hempilatiion. Just 25 years. And I've been actually thinking about, finally putting together a YouTube channel to have all the tracks collected for Hempilatiion, because sadly, there are a bunch you can't get on YouTube. YouTube's pretty good about, giving you all the music that exists in the world. They don't have every Hempilatiion track. There's a few here and there. Every so often I do flashbacks to Hempilatiion at CelebStoner. I did it recently with I Want to Take You Higher by Blues Traveler. And that was just a fun story on how that came about. But I looked up some other tracks and I can't find them. There's a version of Homegrown by a band called Gus that's on the album. And I believe it's on the first album, unless it's on the second one. And that's just, and I looked it up recently because Homegrown just came out all these years later, an album called Homegrown by Neil Young, which he held back with the song Homegrown on it, although the song Homegrown was released on a later album. And I wanted to kind of compare the two tracks, from the Hempilatiion, couldn't find it. So I would like to do that. I need a little assistance on setting up a YouTube channel. But basically, just to back up on this, back in around, when I was music editor of High Times in the early 90s, there was a real wave of bands that were interested in legalization. And High Times took advantage of that by featuring them in the magazine. It started with Cypress Hill and the Black Crowes and kind of expanded throughout the decade. And there was kind of a lineup of bands that really wanted to be featured in the magazine. And at the same time, benefit albums were kind of popular for different causes. And I thought, well, why not one for marijuana? Because so many people seem to want to do something, so give them something to do, so to speak, perform at a concert, do a benefit, do something. And benefits were popular, and the record industry was putting out a lot of CDs like that back then. I was especially influenced by a series called Sweet Relief. And so we came up with this idea. It was essentially my idea, Hempilatiion. I went to NORML and pitched it to them that we would team up, which we agreed on. And they had a guy there named Eric Steenstra, who's been involved with Vote Hemp for years. And Eric was associated with NORML then, friends with Steve D'Angelo, famous for Harborside Health Center out in California, but Steve was an East Coaster and a Washington, D.C. guy then and worked closely with NORML. And Steve was really funding NORML to help work on special projects. So he basically funded Eric working at NORML during that time. And Eric and I teamed up on the Hempilatiion. So it was Eric Steenstra and I as the co-producers. And we needed to find a partner to release the album and put up the money. And we found Capricorn Records, which is a great label, famous for the Allman Brothers and sort of Southern rock style. and they had been a label that had kind of come and went a few times and were revived in the early 90s. And so we knocked on their door, and they're really kind of a family sort of operation run by Phil Walden and his family. And they were super friendly to the cause, and they just jumped aboard. And we couldn't have done it without them. It was a costly album. Every band got $5,000 to produce a track, even if it was already done. Because everybody was called Most Favored Nations, everybody gets the same amount. So it was $100,000 right there.
Wow.
20 tracks, 100,000. Who's going to spend that kind of money? But a label that was behind it, and not to mention, printing costs, making the CD, manufacturing, promotional, everything.
Sure.
They did. So the first album.
Do you remember how much you ended up raising for NORML?
Yeah, we raised about $150,000 with that album.
Oh, that's great, though.
I was pretty much beloved by NORML ever since, because NORML needed money, and I came through, and I even got a raise at High Times for that. They were so impressed with the whole effort.
Oh, cool.
And it was just a blast. It was a great process, and getting the bands, we kind of like a who's who of '90s bands on that album. I mean, 311, Ziggy Marley, Blues Travelers, Sublime,
For sure,
Black Crowes, Cypress Hill, Widespread Panic. What a list. But the interesting thing about the reason why that sold so well, besides it being a good record and with all these great artists, was that the drug czar made a point to attack the album.
That helps.
He did. He actually there was a meeting in L.A. of entertainment executives around that time, and Lee Brown, who was the drug czar then, came to that luncheon, brought the Hempilatiion album, held it up, and said, "This is what's wrong with your industry." I'm not kidding.
Wow.
Getting records like this that promote legalizing, an illegal drug, among other things, were part of the problems. And so that day, I got a call from High Times.
I'm sorry, if we don't legalize it, how do we have an industry?
Exactly. So NBC actually called High Times that day, asking for an interview with me, and I had to do a big kind of pre-rehearsal to make sure I said the right thing. And then I did my interview, and I had a quick quote on the nightly news, and so that just sort of blew the album up. Thank goodness, for the negative publicity that stirred up, a lot of articles about it. Drugs Are Attacks, weed album, or whatever you want to say. And so that really stirred up a lot of interest. So I think that was why. And then we also had a backlash in Boston area where some stores wouldn't sell it. And each place that happened, it just stirred up more interest. So that was great. And so we did that. The album came out, and that was, so successful that we decided to do another. And you don't seem to have that one, but the 1998 version, Hempilatiion, Freedom is, well, the first one was Freedom is NORML. The second one was Free to Weed. And the second one, in '98, I had a lot harder time getting groups involved. I just don't know why. All my list of favorite bands, almost none of the above really wanted to be on it for one reason or the other. And it's kind of a real mixed bag on this one. But the highlights to me are Willie Nelson and George Clinton.
That's awesome.
Album. And interestingly, Willie Nelson wasn't on the first one. And so one day I got a call from him at High Times. We had sent him a Christmas card, and I put my business card in, and Willie wrote back, thanking us for the Christmas card. I got a phone call, and it's like, "Hello, Steve," and it's Willie Nelson, and I no, you got to be kidding. Some friends pulling my leg. No, Steve, it's Willie Nelson. And so we started having a conversation, and I said to him, we had this album that came out. Did you know about it? He says, no. And I said, no, Willie's a big NORML supporter. But we couldn't really track him down for the first album. And so then, I said, well, would you like to be on the second one? And he said, yes. And we started discussing what song he would have on it. So we ended up getting him that way. And then bit by bit, we pieced together the second one. The second one didn't go as well as the first. The government was smart to not attack it. So that one raised about $25,000. So I'd say maybe close to $200,000 to NORML for Hempilatiion.
So a couple notes I have there. First off, if you're interested in doing a third, one really cool thing I'm a big Tim Burton fan, and they have the Nightmare Before Christmas soundtrack. They did Nightmare Revisited, where they had modern bands come in and cover the original track list of A Nightmare Before Christmas. I think it would be so amazing if you had modern cannabis bands, next generation, come in and cover that original track list. That would be
that's a great idea. Another idea we had a while ago was to sort of do a greatest hits from Hempilatiion and add on, say, 5 new songs, from new artists, But to be honest, the industry is not where it was then. There's no
No.
supporter, there's no backer, there's nobody who's going to put up the money for this. It's just the industry is sort of gone in a lot of ways.
Really?
You know, it doesn't exist the way it did. They don't spend that kind of money. They don't have the artist development. You know, when everything sort of went free, you know, the industry went into a tailspin, and they've rebounded, but it's not the same. I
Yeah.
I wouldn't try and make another effort like this again. To
No.
be honest,
Yeah, I
unfortunately.
mean the industry's
I
changed
think
and
the time kind of came for it at a good time when the industry was supportive, when the industry existed, and you know we didn't have to put up the money, and it could be done in a real professional way instead of kind of maybe
yeah.
a low budge way. You know, this
Yeah.
was like top of the line.
Well, if you want to do the YouTube thing, Blazin' Bakery's YouTube channel, I'm happy to put it up on that and cross promote and anything I can do to help out. So,
You know, I'll have to figure that out. For some reason, I'm a little behind the curve on YouTube in terms of setting up a channel, but maybe I'll do it. I really would like to get those 37 songs up there.
yeah, that would be awesome. So, so one thing with NORML, which is still really active, is now you could really see a lot of what their money goes to is legalization is actually hitting a tipping point. So back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, what was really the mission with NORML? Was it every decade we thought this is the one we're getting legalization, or was it just knowing you were chipping away little by little?
I mean, I'll talk about the history, though. I really wasn't involved back then. You know, in the 70s, I was, in my teens and 20s, and I really didn't participate in the legalization effort. I didn't go to any of the rallies,
Yeah.
smoking. I try to explain it to people that New York, even though there was a scene in New York, the Yippies, um, there really wasn't a big problem in New York around marijuana. You know, marijuana was decriminalized in 1977. It was hard to get arrested in New York for pot. It really was. You know, it was pretty lenient back in those days. 70s was pretty open, fun times in New York, even if, the economy went down the tubes. You know, it was sort of like anything goes. And so the cops weren't hassling people like they do, not so much today, but like they did under Giuliani and Bloomberg, hundreds of thousands of arrests for marijuana. But anyway, back to NORML. I mean, NORML's, key function in the 70s was to decriminalize marijuana. That really was the goal. And they, I think about 10 states decriminalized, starting with Oregon, New York in 77. By 78, the decrim wave ended. And so from 73 to 78, those 10 or 11 states. So I think that's what really NORML was known for back then. And came the 80s, and 80s was a difficult time for High Times as well,
Yeah.
during the Just Say No era. And I don't think NORML probably did particularly well during that era either. I mean, High Times barely, made it through that era. There was loss of advertising, hard to find the magazine because retailers were sort of on the run, don't
Huh.
stock stuff, advertisers, paraphernalia. Your paraphernalia company would have been hassled
Yeah.
for advertising in High Times, and probably would have dropped out for a minute because you didn't want to take the chance. So the money was dropping off. So it was a difficult time, the 80s. NORML and legalization movement, really picked up a lot of steam in the 90s. Post 12 years of republicanism in the U.S. and a very anti-drug mission at that time. And Clinton came in, and even though Clinton was really not, marijuana advocate, and he said he didn't inhale, the Democrats kind of opened up the door to a new wave of legalization, or at least the era was ripe for a new wave of legalization. And NORML, took advantage of that as well by jumping on the bandwagon and doing everything they do. And also around that time was splintering off as well. The Marijuana Policy Project started, and they were a splinter of NORML. And the Drug Policy Alliance had begun, in a similar period of time in the late 80s, early 90s. So, some really strong groups started to develop in addition to NORML to try to lead, the movement towards legalization.
Very cool. So, like I said, I listened to you just the other day and you were telling some fun celebrity stories. I hate to make you repeat yourself, but I really did love the Snoop story. Would you mind, but I'll also, if you want to tell a different one, like just so you were the music and culture person at High Times for a while. So you pretty much had every celebrity that came through the doors while you were there interacted with you in some way. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, because I brought in many of them. I mean, me and Malcolm McKinnon, who was known as Dan Sky back then, both of us were sort of like, I guess you could say, celebrity chasers a little bit for High Times.
Yeah.
Even though the celebs didn't necessarily always sell that well on the cover, we always thought it was really good for the credibility of the magazine, to have celebrities, and also better location for the magazine on newsstands. So maybe it wasn't always stuck in some gardening section or tattoo section. Maybe it could be music section, a little easier to find. But the buds usually were the best sellers in high times. So we had to kind of
Huh.
fight our way to get the celebrities on the cover. But it took celebs like Snoop Dogg and Cypress Hill to actually draw enough interest from the audience for the company to allow us to keep doing those. As long as they sold relatively well, we could continue to come back with more celebrity features on the cover.
Mhm.
And so Snoop Dogg was one who we were seeking out for a while. And through the 90s, so we started with Cypress Hill 92, and Snoop was just breaking out at that time. But Snoop had a lot of legal difficulties back then. And so he was a little hard to really, and also his label, he's in and out of record labels, and really wasn't a good direct contact. And so there were a couple of false starts to try and get something going with Snoop Dogg. And then around 2000, we had the opportunity, let's see, I'm thinking, in 2000, because Snoop was on the cover of the first issue of the new millennium. So it was 2000 January issue. And an opportunity came our way for Snoop Dogg to come and do an interview with us. And he came to a photo shoot by Michael Benabib. Mike was a pretty good photographer who had a really good book. And Snoop decided, he liked him. So we decided to go with that photographer. And the day that Snoop showed up, it was a slow day I bet it was the summer. No, let's see, it was January, so it was maybe September. Yeah, it was like fall. And back then, now not so much the case, but there were a lot of dry periods where there was not that much marijuana around, especially in the
Yeah.
summer. I had to kind of wait for outdoor stuff to come in, and so it was a little dry, and we had to really do a big search. And Snoop was already there, and we didn't have any weed at the photo shoot yet, and we didn't know what we were going to get. And so some guys from the office came in, Rick Cusick
This,
and a few others, Mike
it,
Cherniak,
yeah. No, I know those guys.
your Jersey guys. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
they went out on a search and came back with a big bag full of weed, brought it into the studio, opened it up, showed it to Snoop. Snoop put his head in, smelled it, and came out like, that's good, like that's good. And so he's like approved. And then
Yes.
from that point on, we had a very long photo shoot. And the photo shoots usually got done quickly because whoever was being photographed would often kind of get very red-eyed and kind of get very tired and, kind of lose steam, so you kind of get it done quick, first hour, and everything after that would really slow down. Snoop also liked the marijuana we had at the shoot, so he wanted some. So we had to negotiate that with him. Usually we just gave the artist some marijuana, but he wanted like all of it. So we have to negotiate that, because I don't think if it was ours, we often would rent the marijuana from somebody and bring it back and pay them like a rental fee.
That was what I found really fascinating, because to me, I always imagined High Times as either having this like giant back door or like secret grows, because you're taking pictures of plants somewhere. So you're just like, they're not all above board. Like they
Yeah,
must
well,
just have
it
like
wasn't. It wasn't.
closets full.
It
No.
wasn't generally in the office, and where all those photos of mass quantities were at growers' sites and cultivation places, and so oftentimes we didn't have a lot. And also the office was pretty careful legally to they didn't even like us smoking in the office. We always had problems with that because you get busted in the building by tenants and whatever, and just problems. They didn't want to bring attention to High Times. Just don't bring attention to us.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't bring the feds, don't bring the government, don't bring anybody into our office. So they were just very careful. So that day, it was a long photo shoot for some reason. It went on for hours. And I remember come to the end of the photo shoot and Snoop Dogg was asleep on the couch. He was. And I went over to him, tapped him on the shoulder. Snoop, come on, let's go. And it's like I had to wake Snoop up to have him leave the
Adorable.
photo shoot. And the next day he came to our office. We did a full interview. And that day he was great. And he came back up to the office and he was on Howard Stern that morning. And he was telling everybody on Howard Stern how High Times has the greatest weed. And again, that kind of caused concern because I got into the office that morning and I was immediately told by some people that Snoop was on Stern. I hadn't heard it this morning. He was telling everybody that High Times has the best weed, which, is just pointing a finger at like, hey, go up to the High Times office. And
Yeah.
I just walked by and I said, hey, great publicity for High Times, and he came up to the office later on and he had kind of was out of that weed that we had either gave him or sold him, whatever we did at the photo shoot. He needed more. So that was okay, now we need to get some more weed for Snoop Dogg while we do a photo shoot. And then he sat at my desk and he did autographs for everybody in the office. Everybody,
Ah, cool.
I'm gonna get this little line out my door. Everybody's sitting, waiting to get an
Aw,
autograph. He was just great. You
he's
know,
a sweet guy.
he was super friendly, and we featured him on the cover a couple of times while I was there. But that was the first time, and then we followed up when he won an award that we gave him. He came in for that. We put him on the cover again. So it was a it was a nice association. I would say Willie Nelson is always a highlight. Just any time spent with Willie Nelson. For me, it was many years, kind of stalking Willie to get on his bus. It's kind of it's kind of the thing that most stoners kind of talk about, bucket list kind of thing.
Mhm.
It was numerous times where I could not get on that bus. It was in New York City when it was crowded. It was in Austin where there was too many celebs on the bus. They didn't want a Snoop from High Times up there reporting. I remember there was one time Jessica Simpson was on the bus. There were just different people, and they just wanted to keep it protected. And then finally, back in when I was just starting with Freedom Leaf and working with Chris Goldstein, Chris said, "Can we do an interview with Willie?" And Willie was performing in Atlantic City, so we went down there, and Chris and I got on that bus and did our interview with Willie, which was a highlight.
It's
So
cool.
I finally got that one checked off.
I wouldn't even think that like the High Times people would be considered like a Snoop, but I guess
I
yeah,
don't mean
because
I don't mean that. I don't mean that. But I
but
remember I
yeah.
remember in Boston. I remember waiting outside. It was around South by Southwest, and was this party that Willie would have during South by Southwest. So we went over to the event and we hung out backstage. I hung out by the bus, tried to get in, and I remember the guy the guy who was the security guy at the bus. He just kind of kept on saying. He just looked at me because not happening. I mean, just not happening. It's like, okay, we kept waiting, but it finally happened
Ugh, see.
many years later.
I don't know. Yeah. I always think like girl thoughts of like how can I get on this bus, which are usually not the most legit thoughts, but I guess as a guy maybe there's less cards to play. I don't think you would have
Watch out
flirted your way on.
with a girl going on a bus with a rock band. You got to be careful. You never know what they have in mind.
I trust Willie Nelson.
I don't. I said a rock band. Not Willie Nelson. A rock band.
Okay. So yes, you've had a lot of crazy highlights. Ozzy Osbourne, Wu-Tang, Fishbone, Redman, Ziggy, Steven, and Damian Marley. Is there anyone that you kind of really connected with that you've kind of kept in touch with over the years?
I love Ziggy.
Yeah.
I'm friends with Be Real. It's funny because the people, since I left High Times, just 13 years later, I've tried to keep friendships going with some of these artists, and so I will go to their shows. And Ziggy, every time I go to a Ziggy show, I'm always invited back after the show for a hang. I just love the guy. We have the same birthday. He's been doing some great stuff lately. I mean, just this weekend, there was a tribute to his mother, Rita, and there was a Bob Marley concert that they released a couple of weeks ago. But I think Ziggy's behind a lot of this stuff because it's the 75th year of Bob Marley's birth. And so they're doing a lot of special events. And this year they were going to do a lot of live special events, but of course that stuff got shut down. So they've been all over the internet. So I love Ziggy. Guys like Be Real, I can always count on him and call him and maybe get him to participate in an event or something like that. Tommy Chong is super supportive. I've become real friendly with Tommy Chong over the years. Now, I met Tommy at High Times, but I really wasn't his liaison at High Times as much as some other people were. Like a lot of us had sort of liaisons to certain people. And Tommy was a little tighter with Dan Sky, Malcolm McKinnon. But I got to know Tommy sort of in the later years when I was at High Times. And then post High Times, I've done a scripted interview with Tommy at 5 different International Cannabis Business Award conferences. I started it one year, was booked to interview Tommy on stage, like a history of his life, and I do audio visual stuff, show some footage, some clips, some audio, interview, and just and run through it in a scripted fashion, and that we did that 5 times. That was a blast. I'm
Very
really
cool.
friendly with Tommy these days. Like we're
That's
tight
awesome.
and
He's on
friendly.
he's definitely on my short list to have on the podcast. I would love to have him
He
on.
might be available. I might be able to hook that up for you.
Ah, that would be amazing. So, MedMen, as you know, went under, and I just heard a podcast with Tommy Chong. Cheech and Chong are looking to buy out, I think, their line to do dispensaries. And I think the person possibly bidding against them is High Times to do a line of dispensaries. So I thought either way, kind of cool, but I don't know who you think would win that cage
Well,
match
High Times is not doing so well right now, so I wouldn't bet on High Times. I
no,
would bet on Cheech and Chong.
for
Well,
sure.
Cheech and Chong has a licensing deal to have their products sold, in Cheech and Chong themed stores. So we'll see if that gets off the ground. There's a lot of stuff that gets suggested and then not necessarily
Yeah.
happens. And
Yeah.
especially in this environment right now, opening up more retail, that might not be the wisest thing to do. You might want to wait and see what's happening with COVID before
Yeah.
you start opening more stores. And High Times, they're just kind of hexed. They just, everything they do goes wrong. So,
Yeah,
they've
what
been,
happened there? It just seemed like if anyone was poised to be this legacy brand that had a giant head start, it was High Times, and they have just dropped the ball again and again. Like, you say they're hexed, do you think it's just bad luck or bad?
I mean, not really luck. They create their own problems, but I just feel like High Times, it just seems like whatever this group who took over the company does, it goes wrong. They make promises that they can't keep. They buy something, it drops. They say they're in the retail business, they're not. They're just trying to drive people to invest in their stock offer. They have a stock offer that's
Yeah.
basically a crowdfunding offer. It's not really you get anything, but you're kind of helping High Times along. They've raised $15 million alone from gullible, fans, who are
Yeah.
just giving High Times money that may convert the stock one day if they ever get listed, but they're not listed because everything they
Yep.
do financially is wrong. They're constantly being told, do this, do that, do that. They're constantly being extended because they don't have enough money. So I don't know anything about the owners currently, the
Yeah.
team that took it over. But as an example, they back in 2017 they claimed to have bought 60% of the shares of the company for $70 million, and the shares are the 100 shares, and so those 60 shares were divvied up amongst the new investors, one of whom was Damian Marley of the Marley family. Well, it turns out they dropped out of that deal. They were kind of just used, to have
Hmm.
their name to look like Marley family bought High Times or something. They got out of it because they knew it was a scam.
Yeah.
So, things like that. If they piss off and they burn, people like Damian Marley, how can you trust High Times? To have
Yeah.
a bad relationship with the Marleys, so I just think that they've just burned so many bridges. I'm
For
not
sure.
hoping for I'm not hoping for them to go down the tubes, but and I wish they could turn the corner. But the magazine stopped publishing. All my
Yeah.
friends are no longer there, so I just
Well,
I
it's been mostly laid off now and then just West Coast and outsourcing. And they've also gone through, I think, 3 CEOs in the past couple
They
years.
have. They
Yeah.
have. And that's where they're blowing through a lot of money too that they don't have because they're hiring high-end CEOs, high-paid people who have contracts, and then they get fired and they're owed, 6 months worth of pay. So
Yeah.
it's bad business. I mean, you could kind of point to, you know, around the time that Michael Kennedy, who was their legal consultant, I mean, essentially ran the company, with Tom Prasad's family, the founder, Michael and his wife Eleanor. But Michael died, and he was the kind of father figure up there, and ran the place very, like a real tight ship. And people, have great feelings for Michael, but he made some bad decisions over the years that harmed High Times, and some of the decisions he made before he died were bad decisions too, steering the company in a
Yeah.
direction towards getting sold. So there were a lot of bad
And
decisions.
after his death, there was a lot of infighting, I've heard as well too.
Well, his
Within.
wife was thrown out of the office and
Yeah.
locked out, so to speak. I mean, that's I'm not a huge fan of her as well, but I don't well, they treated me poorly. By
Yeah.
the time I was thrown out of there for
So so for the book Pop Culture, right? Is that the reason?
yeah, yeah, my
So
book.
yeah. Oh, yeah, go grab it. So I was looking at the reviews on this on Amazon. It has great reviews, and I haven't read it, but what I understand, it's basically a cannabis pop culture. Why in the world would you be fired or asked to leave or whatever the situation was over just writing a innocent pop culture book?
Well, at that time, I had been editor of the magazine with Dave Bienenstock and Rick Cusick for a couple of years. The magazine had kind of gone down. They needed us to kind of revive it. They made some mistakes going back, more
Mm.
mistakes, by the board of High Times, which, by the way, I was a member of at the time, but I was a minority member, so they didn't really listen to anything I said. And so they just, kept on, sort of doing things that would not, benefit the company. And we came in and we helped get High Times back to where it should be financially and sales wise, but they didn't seem to think that was good enough. So they decided to let us go as our team and bring in the old editor in chief. And he came back for a year and things didn't work out so well with him. And it just was sort of a revolving door of editors around that time. And so they just didn't seem to kind of know what they really wanted to do with the company around then. So kind of, really High Times, I know people, have good feelings of the period of time. Some say 2005 to 2015, but I really feel like post 2001, 9/11, the company just went downhill. Uh, Magazine sales slipped. They changed the focus of the magazine for a short time.
Mhm.
They gave it back into our hands, and they kept on shuffling people around and around, and they couldn't decide on an editor and couldn't decide on a particular focus for the magazine. And they just think they just were sort of unclear what they wanted to do with the company. I think it's sort
Yeah.
of showing now, that they didn't really have a plan back then for legalization when legalization would happen. And once it did, the only thing High Times really decided to do then was to, bump up their cannabis cup. They didn't really do anything else. They just opened the cannabis cup in the US, and they didn't really plan for legalization any other way.
Interesting. So after that, you went to Freedom Leaf, or in between, you started the blog CelebStoner, right? That was the interim.
Yeah, that was kind of at the end of my run at High Times. I guess I didn't really totally explain that answer to that question. I kind of got a little off track, but the back to your question of like the book and stuff like that. When I left High Times, I quit. I didn't really like the whole scenario of what they did and the demotions and stuff like that that they were doing to me and the others. And so I decided I really want to continue in the role, and I quit. And then they asked me to stay on as a retainer, just do some writing and do a couple of award shows I was doing. So I stayed on for like that. I left the office, didn't work there anymore, and then I heard from my friend Shirley Halperin, who had worked at High Times and now was doing some other stuff, and she had come up with an idea for a book, which turned into Pop Culture, which was basically terminologies. Like the book is kind of like a dictionary of terms of words, and each word tells a history. And then the back of the book is sort of a guide to culture, movies, music, television, cool shows, cool things, celebrity busts, some recipes, and so things like that. And so we came up with a pretty good idea for a book, and we ended up selling it. And High Times got word of the book. I didn't tell them about it. I didn't feel it was necessary, and they got word of the book from I don't know how. And they kind of just got real nosy about it, and they wanted to see my table of contents. They wanted to know everything, and I brought up the table of contents one day, and it was kind of a leafing through, and I got the impression High Times was maybe working on their own book. So I think
Oh.
they got competitive with me, and they wanted to kind of slow me down,
Hmm.
and they also legalistically wanted to make sure there was nothing in the book that would somehow be harmful to High Times, thinking that I might have some negative things to say. Which, by the way, there was nothing negative about High Times and Pop Culture, but because they acted so legalistic and
Yeah.
difficult, we took every reference to High Times out of the book except for just the one section under the H's with High Times. There were multiple references in the book. We took them all out, just like screw High Times. We're not going to give them too much love
Yeah.
because they're being difficult. And so they wanted to see the actual manuscript. They wanted all kinds of stuff. And it turned out that by that point, they were not very belligerent. And my publisher and my co-author and my agent were all kind of antagonistic towards High Times by then, and felt like
Huh.
we don't do them any favors. And it was, kind of time for me to step away. And then High Times fired me on the heels of all that because I was being insubordinate or whatever they might call it. And that was that. So my career ended at High Times that way. And that's why I don't have very nice things to say about some of the people who were responsible for that. One of
For
whom is
sure.
no longer with us, but I still don't have good feelings towards that person. They didn't
Eh,
have to, they didn't have to treat me like that after 20 years. And I was such a High Times cheerleader.
And you know what? I think that's unfortunately always the way. People who get married to a job where you don't have ownership in the company.
I
Like
had,
I no,
I
I
had,
don't. No, I know you had some like stock, but I mean ownership. In the more literal sense of like this is my baby. Like I
well,
own the company where
well, it's,
I can run it and do it. Like I don't know. I've worked for people where even though I helped get it off the ground, it was I didn't have the final say. So
right.
then it really hurt when So anyway, now if it's not something I wholly own, I try not to put my heart into it.
Well, you learn the hard way there, but in
Yeah,
this situation, I mean, I was brought in, as a low end shareholder, and I was entitled, to be honest, but
yeah,
there was a lot of complications around that time of the trust that the company was left in for 22 years. From the time Tom Forsyth died in '78 till the trust ended in 2000, the company was run by the trustees, which is essentially the family and the lawyer and his wife.
yeah,
And then the trust was never really clear what was in the trust until we saw it around 2000. And we were led to believe that the company was supposed to be left in the hands of the employees who have been senior there. So who was going to be those senior employees? And I was sort of on the bubble of 10 years around that time.
yeah,
And so it was a little question of who was going to inherit the company. And it turned out that the company was inherited by the people who were already running it.
yeah.
So they scammed their way into being employees and not being the trustees that they actually were. They ran things, yet they were supposedly employees. So they took 51% and gave us 49.
Hmm.
So 49 just didn't give us any say.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when I was, got disenchanted with High Times, or in the around 2006, 2007, I sold my shares.
Okay. Do you have a hard stop at 1 hour? Because I
No, no,
still.
can you go
Okay.
for it?
Okay. Cool. I mean,
All
it's
right.
not. It's not an hour yet. I just want to
Right.
pace myself.
Answer to your question about
Yes.
Freedom Leaf, CelebStoner and Freedom Leaf, just to
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
trace the steps. So while I was at still in High Times, since I was doing all that celebrity stuff, I kind of was coming up with this idea for a celebrity website, and it was all very new back then. I mean, obviously High Times had a website, but there really was very little competition for cannabis sites back then. And I started very kind of slow. I started a blog spot website to just get my feet wet. I
Hmm.
called it Blooming Ideas, and it was just anything I wanted to write about. But it kind of taught me a few things, taught me how to locate a photo in an article, told me how to do some HTML and fix some code, which most people may not know how to do now, but I can get in the back end of my website and fix things with code because I know how to do that. I'm not a code writer, but I know basics.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot of basics that way. And then a cousin of mine recommended I started a website, and then I came up with the idea of CelebStoner. And I launched it in like late 2006, early 2007, right around the time Willie Nelson got arrested for marijuana, one of his several arrests in Texas. It kind of started as a site that was focusing on marijuana arrests, celebrities. A lot of celebs were getting busted then for pot and other drugs. Less so now, thankfully, but back then, 60, 70, 80 a year. And I would dig up the police reports and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of started like that, then expanded out into more cultural coverage and just
Yeah.
journal news stories. So I did that for like 7 years. Did pretty well in the first few years because, again, not a lot of competition. Made a lot more money then than I'm making now, to be
Yeah.
honest. I mean, there's multiple reasons for that, but I think mostly it was because it was, the market wasn't overcrowded. There was just a handful of marijuana blog websites. So I was among the first. It was High
I.
Time,
I
Cannabis Culture, Toke of the Town, places like that. And I was one of the first.
scope. Skunk. Dope.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
magazine.
Yeah. So I feel like an idiot, probably because I don't do my homework well enough. I do my own PR. I'm not on top of all this. I didn't know you were the person behind CelebStoner. I
That's
just
me.
always I looked at you as High Times and Freedom Leaf. I always thought, you're, and I was like, oh, that's such a fun thing to have started. Honestly, I think it's really cool. It's a goal of mine to get in at one point to be famous enough to be called a celeb stoner. Yeah, I looked at the tag cloud, and it's funny because you've mentioned Willie Nelson quite a few times on your website. And legalization, marijuana legalization gets 110 mentions, I guess, in articles, or 110 articles, and Willie with Nelson gets 99. So
That's about right.
yeah, so he's just
But, but, but,
behind.
but it indicates that that's kind of what the website's about. It's kind of on
Yeah,
one hand, it's a serious, legalization site, and on the other hand, it's kind of a fun celebrity site. So kind of
for
like,
sure.
married it too. So it's from, I found it kind of odd that from 2007 to 2014, I was not offered any kind of job in the marijuana world. I mean, nobody even nibbled. Nobody. I mean, it might have been a couple of nibbles to buy CelebStoner, but
Hmm.
other than that, there was just nobody seemed to recognize that I was one of the few people out there that edited a marijuana magazine. And there were a couple of more magazines coming out around that time. West Coast Cannabis, Kush, I don't know, there were a few others, and I guess Cannabis Now, and no opportunities came my way. And then thanks to Chris Goldstein and Cliff Perry of Freedom Leaf, I got an opportunity to become editor of Freedom Leaf. And Chris, who I've known via NORML over the years, friends, he was brought on to be editor of Freedom Leaf for the first two issues. And I wrote for both issues. Freedom Leaf is a kind of a smaller version of a magazine. It's kind of like a digest or a pamphlet in a way.
Yeah,
And the idea was to be advocacy oriented, promote the organizations, the efforts of NORML, MPP, Women Grow, the different groups, your group, and just promote them as much as we can throughout our pages, and just do a kind of a fun magazine that focused on advocacy and the new wave of business. Because we were kind of getting in on that business side too, and Freedom Leaf didn't really find any footing in the media end of things. And I kind of figured that would be the case because they didn't really have any experience except for me, and it wasn't a newsstand product, and it was a giveaway. There's really no revenues, and they didn't really have an advertising plan in place. When I came aboard, there was an ad rep, and he didn't last, and he was never replaced. We never had an ad rep pretty much for the next 3-4 years. So
hmm,
we really weren't consistently trying to sell advertisements to make any money. So the company kind of shifted gears and started CBD product lines, and bought a few and started a few, and felt that that was where the money was at, and where revenues could come in. And it was pretty, smart assessment.
yeah.
And it turned out that last year, Freedom Leaf was merged with another company called Green Lotus Hemp out of Dallas, and they now have renamed themselves GL Brands. They basically merged with Freedom Leaf. It still used the Freedom Leaf ticker because Freedom Leaf is OTC stock. And at first they thought maybe they wanted to do something with the media property, meaning the magazine and the website, which I also ran. And they just killed the magazine immediately. So that one I just showed you was our last issue. I did
Oh,
30 total of, well, back up one more time, is that after the first two issues, Chris was a little overwhelmed. I had written to Chris saying that I thought it needed some improvement in overall in terms of the editing, and I would just gave him some like a critique, like things he could do to fix. And Chris got back to me and said, "Do you want to run the magazine?" Yeah, I don't think he felt it was really for him, to be the editor. I didn't want to take his job, but Chris really kind of laid it on me and thought I'd be better suited for it. So we did 35 total issues. I edited the last 33. So I got let go last August after they killed the magazine and then killed the website, essentially. And the website's still there, but they haven't added anything to the website since September. And I'd really done a good job building up that site, by the way. And I was a little sad to see it kind of go, and a lot of nice content on that site that I was mostly responsible for. But I didn't really know what would be, like I said, from '07 to 2014, no offers of a job. Then I got the job at Freedom Leaf. So finally something came through. It wasn't a high paid job, but I was able to work at home, and it was just right for me. It wasn't that hard. And also when we started with 8 mags a year, and that's a little too much work, I thought, for the money I was getting paid. We reduced it to 4. That was a little bit better. And then I zeroed in on the website, which I wanted to really improve. So I did that. But to my good fortune, since I left Freedom Leaf, I've had the opportunity to edit several magazines that are published by Centennial Media. Centennial is a longtime publisher in New York who rebranded under Centennial a few years ago. They were originally known as Harris Publications. And they've started publishing some marijuana titles over the last few years that would be considered special interest issues, say 2 a year, devoted to CBD. So I was brought in to be editor of the CBD magazine.
Oh, very cool.
A complete guide to CBD. And previous to that, one of their other titles is this one, Marijuana Goes Mainstream.
Very
So
cool.
I edited this one and the latest, this one. Now this one came out right when the pandemic began. So I don't know if anybody saw it because nobody could get in a store because they mostly sell in Barnes and Noble and Walgreens and CVS, places like that. And but this one's currently out, so if people could get into stores, please go find it.
That's awesome. I'll have to pick one up. Absolutely.
Barnes and Noble, if these places are opening up, you know, I don't think you can go to Barnes and Noble in New York right now, but elsewhere, you know, where things are opened up a little bit more.
Probably,
you know, wherever like, magazines are sold.
Like supermarket checkout or
probably,
yeah, right?
Even that. Yeah, maybe even, you know, Whole Foods.
Because they're open.
Places like that.
Yeah. So, as far as cannabis culture goes, because so many things we're talking about now, and you also wrote Reefer Movie Madness, which was a stoner film guide. Now, the idea of the classic stoner, which is Cheech and Chong, who is, you know, legends. We're talking about Tommy Chong, you know, all those great movies and the motif, tie-dye comedy. It's really being like kind of crucified these days as complete pushback against, if we're ever going to normalize it, we have to crush that stereotype because that's what's holding us back. And in return, you're seeing like when you go to a conference now, everyone has to wear a suit. You know, you have to look this new part to fit this new cannabis. And I mean, I'm of the thought that we're completely sucking the soul and the life and the passion out of this. And like even, so I had a friend who worked at High Times who told me a story of applying for a cannabis license. And the lawyer said, when he was talking about featuring his experience at High Times, the lawyer said, bury it. Like you don't even want that association because they want people to have this new corporate business acumen and mentality, which doesn't coincide with, you know, cannabis culture. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, with the, you know, the complete decline in, you know, of MedMen, you know, with, you know, that kind of tells you that whole concept is flawed. You know, that whole idea of forgetting stoner, which is what Med, you know, my response to MedMen was constantly forget MedMen. You know, forget stoner was a real great example of sort of attacking us on the High Times sort of model. And hey, CelebStoner, you know, I mean, the term stoner is even considered negative these days. You know, it's considered almost like the N-word. You know, it's our word. You know, it's like the N-word. You know, is used in its own way, and we use it in our way. You know, yeah, stoner has a negative. You stoner. You know, so something bad about it. It's used negatively on people, but you know, you could define it however you want. Cheech and Chong, you know, they're just an easy target, you know, because they look so funny and everything. And, you know, some people want to blame Cheech and Chong for, you know, legalization taking so long. You know, it's a cheap shot. You know, they did what they did in the 70s. Like I said, the fun time of the 70s, post the war, when everybody just wanted to lighten up a little bit after a really difficult 60s and early 70s. And, you know, the peace movement, anti-war movement, you know, I mean, it looks like what was happening then looks like what's happening today, you know, with the struggles in Portland and stuff and the tear gassing and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, that's, it's not really fair to compare then and now, you know, give them the credit for what they did. But, you know, some people think it's dopey. People think it doesn't really represent what we want it to be. It's not serious. You know, we need to be more serious. And, you know, but, you know, when you're talking about, you know, suits and ties, when I got involved in the late 80s, that issue was going on just with NORML. NORML didn't like this scruffy, you know, kind of activists who were coming to their events and really preferred people to wear a tie and dress up, you know, and so there's been that schism for a while. Now it's a little more obvious, you know, with the big money that's come into the industry trying to, shoot down the history of who we are. Let's forget about who we are and how we got here, and let's just make some money.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's really kind of I I feel like in some way we need the people to come in, and because we need the numbers and we need to hit a tipping point for legalization, especially going to a popular vote. But we're really seeing is it's just crushing, and certainly not to pick on Cheech and Chong, because I think what they do is wonderful. They set a model for the stoner comedy for people like Dave Chappelle, for Seth Rogen, for these people to keep, and I think it's a great genre. And I'm saying they've been demonized for all these years, and if you take that all away, well, I mean, it's like taking away all the great alcohol scenes in movies, talking about people getting drunk and college kids having
Well, well,
fun. And
furthermore, I mean, at this period of time, we're talking about diversity. I mean, Cheech and Chong are pretty darn diverse.
yeah,
I mean, Chong is half Chinese. He's from Canada. Mother is Scottish. Father was Chinese. Cheech is Mexican American. So in that respect, they're way ahead of their time. And if anything, they really represent a period of comedy in the 70s that was just wild and crazy.
yeah,
Steve Martin, Richard Pryor, Robin Williams, they're all of that era.
yeah,
Everybody had crazy comedy bits back then. It was just a wild period. And so Cheech and Chong just represent that. I mean, their movies, were fair. I mean, Up in Smoke is great, but everything after that was a little bit less so.
yeah,
But, as time went on, I mean, Chong has really become a great advocate. Cheech kind of stayed away and came back. There's just respect for those guys. We're going to
yeah,
miss them when they're gone.
for sure. So you received the 2014 Normal Media and Culture 2004 Normal Media and Culture Award. You've had award shows of your own. You did the Doobies, which were for music, and then the Stonies, which actually were for cannabis culture. Now, do you feel like an award show like that? I know it's no longer going, but would it have a place today where everyone's award shows are for basically, what company had the biggest IPO?
I
It's
wish, I mean that, High Times kind of let it go, but I created the Stonies. It was an idea I had, obviously take off on the Tonys, but, not a Broadway, show. This was, around that time, the late 90s, there was a big sort of emphasis on these sort of stoner comedies, less so now,
mhm.
but 20 years ago, they were really popular. Big Lebowski, you mentioned Dave Chappelle, Half Baked was that year, Dazed and Confused, the Friday series. A few years later, the Harold and Kumar movies came out. It was quite a good run. Pineapple Express, all the Seth Rogen movies, or, Judd Apatow, Seth Rogen, that team. So it was really a great run of movies around that time. And so that's like really what we were playing off of. There was just so much to, the idea of the Stonies was to, celebrate, like positive depictions of marijuana in
Yeah.
movies and TV, not the negative. And if anything, we'd make fun of the negative. And we're just general depictions. What's the most accurate? What's the one that makes you laugh the most or cry the most, whatever it may be. And we expanded that to television as well. So we have some TV categories. Initially, just started movies. And it would just be best movie, best comedy, best drama, actors, music. Best scene, because there's like in a lot of movies it's just like one little scene where somebody sparks up a joint, and that's the only
Mhm.
reference in a whole movie, but it could be the best scene in the movie.
When I have someone who I just like, who's not necessarily in cannabis, who I want to go on, that's what I'm searching. I'm like, come on, tell me they had one scene in one movie so I can bring them on the podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
So so that stuff was really just picking up a lot of interest, and so that's where the Stonies came from. We started that in 2000. And we did that for 4 or 5 years in New York, and High Times was going through some changes, so we stopped doing it. And then I left, and then they resumed the award show out in LA, and they continued doing the Stonies for a few years out there, and then they killed it.
Mhm.
So it had a life, maybe 7 or 8 years. The Doobies as well, but the Doobies was the Doobies a music award show, and we started that in New York too, and that moved to Texas, and we started doing it during South by Southwest. Bobby Black took that over when I was gone. So those were kind of the ideas behind those events, but we had a lot of fun. I mean, one of the really nice things about High Times, I could say negative things. One of the good things, you know, I could do Hempilatiion, I could do award shows, I could meet all these bands, I could hang out backstage after shows. I could be an editor, I could be an advocate, I could be at the NORML conference, I could be at, you know, the Panterist concert, all over the place, from one
Sure.
thing, Seattle Hempfest to Boston, you know, to around the world. So, you know, it was a great opportunity to do a lot of things and wear a lot of hats.
Yes. So do you think there's a place for award shows of that ilk anymore, or is it more
I
that we
think,
belong
I
in
think,
this
I
business
think it'll be,
world?
I have a friend who is interested in the Stonies and really wanted to take it to a bigger audience, make it really a Hollywood thing,
Yeah.
and was involved in the events that I did. He's a producer out in Hollywood, and he's contacted me off and on over the years saying that he has some interest in the Stony Awards or some award show, which would be along that kind of name, you know, an award show for movies, music, maybe a variety of entertainment and categories, you know, calling it whatever you want to call it. And that there's been some interest off and on out in Hollywood. So maybe it will come back, you know, it'll be
Cool.
something I created, now we're what, 20 years ago? Maybe it'll come back. So I think so. Why not? Why
Okay.
not something along those lines? You know, though right now it just seems secondary to everything else is going on, but who knows, maybe.
Sure. So, on the topic of awards, you did something amazing for women. I don't want to mention any names because I always say in cannabis, you know, we have a common enemy. We can't have infighting because that'll just break the movement apart. We need to have the common enemy of people who don't want legalization. But you did something really amazing for women. Would you mind if we talked about that a little?
No, let's do that.
Okay. So there was an award list that came out for 100 greatest people of all time in cannabis. And you pointed out that there were like 7.5 women on it. And I have to say, even before I heard of that controversy, it was the first thought that popped in my head because it's something as a woman who's been in cannabis for over a decade now, I've seen the tide turn to where it's a little better, but it's really horribly skewed where I used to, you know, be at a convention floor, any of those you talked about, you know, from Seattle Hempfest to Boston Hempfest and everything in between. And people would look through me to maybe the guy who I hired to help me out and say, hey, can I talk to your boss? You know, or they would just think I'm the booth girl. So, you know, it's been a uphill battle in cannabis for women. It's been many ways a boys club. But I also think as someone who has been around a long time, that people don't pay enough respect to who came before them. When I was at Boston Hemp Fest one year, Rick Cusick came up to me and he said, do you know who Brownie Mary was? And I didn't. Now I know it's Mary Rathburn, but he said, that's your spirit guide. You need to find out who that is. So I went home and I looked it up and all that. And since then, I've gone to people, modern, you know, cannabis people who've only been in the industry a few years. And now that I know a lot of the history, I'll go up to them and be like, hey, you know what? This is who your forefather was. You should look up this person and kind of pay homage to them or something. You could see them glaze over because they're just like, whatever. Like, we're forgetting the shoulders of what this was built on. And I think that list, A, missed on some women, and B, pointed out some people who were just very modern contributors who maybe were just famous to begin with and then they stuck their neck out a little. So I was really proud. But so at the end of my rant, what you did is you said you were on that list of the top 100 of all time. And you said, give my spot to a woman because there's all these great women who you've left off this list. And I thought that was, and then through CelebStoner, you put out a list of 500 women in cannabis. I was on it. Everyone who is contributing to this great movement was on it. It was a beautiful list. So just tell me a little bit about that without saying anything negative about anyone, because that's never my intention.
No, that's not, well, you know, that list came out, the 420 icons list. So obviously icons, I guess it's looking back to OGs, as they say. People have been around the marijuana scene for a while. You know, it came out on 420. It was a real busy day, to say the least. And I saw it in the morning and I kind of scanned through it quickly. I was, you know, proud to be on it, but I didn't really give it a close look through. And then I posted it and I said, oh, you know, thanks for being on the list. And then I saw a couple women post on it, hey, where are the women? And it, you know, I had to be woken up a little bit too. You know, I was a little sleepy that day in recognizing it. It was Hempilatiion, Chong, and a few other women in the marijuana scene who raised the point. And that pretty much was it for me. Is like, I looked at that list, oh, I can't believe it really was only 7. And when I went through the list, it's just like, well, I'm not saying people didn't warrant being on the list. There were a lot of Dutch growers that I thought maybe were a little overkill, because nobody knows a lot of these legendary Dutch growers, in the U.S. They have a place. They've, certainly had a lot to do with what people are growing these days, so many of the seeds that have come over from Holland. But still, so I mean, I think it was lacking in general in terms of missing certain people. But I kind of looked at that list and I said, there's 3 women that are not on this list, and I'm, not including you, unfortunately, Tara, but who've been around a lot longer. And it's like, if they're not on the list, and this is supposed to be OGs, then what is this about? And so the 3 women were Elvie Musica, who is a federal medical marijuana patient. She's one of 2 people left in America who gets her marijuana from the federal government, that pretty bad weed the federal government grows, but she does still get it. And she was, in 1988, became the first woman to receive federally grown marijuana for her glaucoma. And she's about 80 years old and lives out in Oregon, and years ago moved out to the West Coast so she could get her hands on better quality marijuana. And she's complained vigorously about the poor quality of the government grown marijuana. Regardless, she still gets it. I don't know how she could be forgotten. So she's number 1 on my list. I think she's like Brownie Mary. Yeah. She's really like top of the line female icon in cannabis. Okay, they missed her. Then Debbie Goldsberry, longtime friend of mine who runs Magnolia Wellness out in California, was one of the co-founders of Berkeley Patients Group, started the Cannabis Action Network in the 90s. Longtime friend with her. She's like one of the true leaders of the medical legalization movement in California. There's almost nobody more significant than Debbie in California when it comes to that. So she was ignored, and I've seen her ignored numerous times. And then Jody Emery, who's like the princess of pop in Canada. She, for the longest time was married to Mark Emery. No longer, together they, led a campaign to legalize it in Canada. Mark got into trouble, got arrested. They've since divorced. Some issues around Mark, but Jody's just great. And so, how could they be left off? So I woke up the next morning. This is what happened that night. 420 went by. So long day, lots of excitement. The whole day. It was a long day. I was on all kinds of programs, including one by Debbie Goldsberry, a 420 event. And I got a call, of all things, on 420 night from Elvie. She calls me twice a year, maybe. So it was a 420, call. Happy 420. And I just felt so sad that I couldn't tell her, hey, you're on this list.
Yeah.
She's blind, so she wouldn't even see it, really. She'd have to be told. And I couldn't say, hey, Elvie, you're on this list. Congratulations. And I woke up next morning, I thought, I'm just going to give up my spot and see if they'll give it to Elvie. And I put it out there, and I got a lot of flack from the coordinator of the event, the Cannabis Business Awards, who took, offense to me criticizing,
For sure.
their selections. And just, was sort of getting it from all sides around by then already. So my response, because she didn't respond very kindly to my request, first she said yes, and then she said no. It's like, yes, okay, and then she said, no, you can't tell me how to run my awards, program, whatever. Okay, so I left it at that, and then I decided to write an article explaining why I gave up my spot on that list, and then following that, I put together my own list. It really wasn't my original plan, but on the heels of writing that article and the response I got, I thought it was time to put together a list that was sort of not biased by anybody's opinions, pros and cons. It's just a long list that includes as many women as possible, and just totally objective. I mean, as long as you have some place in the cannabis community, you've done something, you got one link out there online, you have a company, you work someplace, you did something, you got arrested and you became an activist, any number of reasons. I just look for like a link, maybe a Facebook, and look through Facebook or a LinkedIn and just see who's who. And I went through everything, magazines, Facebook, and I was able to put together a list of 500. It was 500 women who have contributed to cannabis over the last 50 years or something like that, who've made
Yeah.
major contributions to cannabis, or who should be recognized for making major contributions to
Yeah.
cannabis, and lacking being recognized. The problem with these lists are 500, 100, you're just going to exclude people. So, you're going to kind of piss off people who think they should be on it, flatter people who are on it, and make other people yearn to be on it,
Yeah.
because they'll work harder. Maybe they don't deserve yet to be on a list of like that, but they're working towards it. So in one way that's good, that it makes people work harder to, be recognized. But in another way, you're always going to make mistakes, and you're always going to have people chipping away at the list and saying, why this, why that, who, why, what, where, and you just can't win.
Well, yeah, a lot of
So I
things with
put out a
those.
list that people are going to criticize, be mad about. So my list was 500. I seeded it with 500, and I opened it and I put it out there on, I think, a Friday, or I think it was a Saturday. I worked all weekend on that list, because once I put it out, I started to, and I asked people, and at the bottom I said, you have more names, let me know, and I just got an avalanche
Yeah,
from
I mean,
women and men,
it
for a
was.
lot of people.
I'm sorry, I'm
Okay.
ADD interrupt, but no, I just want to compliment you. It was really touching. Like, I know so many women whose days you made, who it was just all over their social media. Oh my God, but like, because a lot of times you don't get the recognition.
And I still need to add, to that too. I'll take now I've taken a little break from it. I did the first one. So see, 500 started. By the end of the first round, it was sort of about up to 1,000. So it had doubled. With everybody adding on, and all the time I was spending looking up every name to make sure, just to make sure. Just because you give me a name doesn't mean I put it on there. I just have to do a little research just to make sure. I'd say 98% of the names made it, and maybe 2% I couldn't find something on anybody. So, and I write back to somebody, can you send me a link? And if they do, fine. If they don't, well, maybe not, don't include them. But by and large, everybody was included. And then I did it another round 3 weeks later. And said 3 weeks ago I did this. If there's people on here that you think are missing, let me know. And that was another round up to 1,400. So now I'm at 14. I bet if I did another round, I'd probably get up to 16 and 17. But right now, we're concentrating on some other things. So I don't want to just focus strictly on the women's issue right now. We're talking about issues that deal with people of color, Black Lives Matter. We're dealing with COVID. So I don't really want to narrow it down to just women's issues at this point.
For sure. And I would not have expected to be on any top 100 list. And a big part of that too is because I made a conscious choice to keep my head down, because what I sold could have counted as paraphernalia. And I just didn't want my company to get shut down for paraphernalia law. So I said, if I ever become too vocal about, because like even had opportunities I turned down, which I don't know, maybe I regret, maybe I don't. But like Ed Rosenthal approached me to do the new version of the Cannabis Cookbook for Aunt Sandy many years ago. And I said, you know what? I think that's just too strong a link. Then my mix is going to be considered. So I don't know. If I could do it all again, maybe it would have been more fun to have actually made some bigger moves than I did. But I was there. I was there in the, with my little hood on in the back, waving at the people.
They're a good company, Quick Trading. They're a good company to be affiliated with. Ed Rosenthal and his wife Jane. Maybe go back, maybe revisit that.
It was a long time ago. I don't know if he'd remember me. Probably not. But also I don't know. I want to have him on the podcast though, so I will be reaching out to him. But also another thing I was going to say with that list. So there is a paper that has written about me several times. And then they contacted me to put me on a 40 under 40 list, and they said, "But we would like you to buy some advertising." And I said, "Well, I want to buy some advertising." And I said, "Well, then you're probably not on the 40 under 40 list." I said, "Okay, then I'm not on it." But like, so a lot, yeah, a lot of those lists are just people who just pay to get on them too. So it's not even, I don't know. It's all just ridiculousness.
Yeah, it's very advantageous. You put it on your website. I've been recognized as they're advantageous. So I'm sure, there are going to be people in our industry who are going to take advantage of that because they know people are trying to build up their careers, and that might be a stepping stone.
Sure.
So that's why, a lot of people make fun of awards. They just, I've noticed in Facebook, a lot of people make fun of all the awards that have been going on in the marijuana community. Everybody just wants to just kind of like stroke each other and tell each other how great they are. But I like them in the right time, in the right place. And of course, I gave out awards, so I sort of a student of award shows. So I don't really come down on awards and awards presentations. I think it's good to hail people for great work,
Yeah.
but you have to do it the right way, and don't do it in a sleazy way, and don't use it so that you're gonna, you'll get your award only if you do something for me. That's
Yes.
ridiculous.
Yes. So the last thing, and then I will let you go. Thank you so much for your time. So you did another awesome thing for me, for the city of New York, is you've been doing the cannabis parade, the marijuana march, whatever you want to call it. So I have a picture of me with a curly haired afro when I was at Fordham in 1990 something in the park when it was back in Washington Square Park. And then exactly 10 years later, I got to speak last year. It's so sad it was canceled this year. You did the virtual one. But yeah, it was so amazing. It was so full circle for me. And I did a really pretty poor job speaking, because instead of just legalize it sound bites, I was very much in conference mode from speaking at so many conferences, and that doesn't go well. But nonetheless, it was an amazing, amazing day. And it's something that you've been doing for the city for a long time, and you continue to do this year, even under COVID, which was very cool. Keep the spirit alive. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add about the parade.
Well, you went to Fordham, by the way, in the Bronx?
I was in the Bronx for a few weeks, and then the Manhattan campus. Yeah.
All right. Um, uh, it was tough to lose the event this year. It was so close to when things started happening, when COVID spread started happening. And I was pretty quick to recognize the problems of COVID, as opposed to some other people out there who are kind of like la-di-da. I contacted our board members pretty quickly and said, we got to cancel. And we also have to cancel right away, because we have to show people that we're being responsible. We're not going to wait and string it out to the last minute. And I was watching all the other events in our industry, how they were handling it. Some of them were canceling right away, and some were stringing it out to the last minute. Stringing it out to the last minute, you end up with people going to Barcelona, for the ICBC that didn't happen. And it was kind of dangerous for people to be going over there when they were shutting down Europe. So you had to make decisions early, not late. And I felt, in our situation, we needed to, show that we were responsible. And we did. We waited a few days beyond my request to immediately. But so we had to, we're an open air event with a lot of people, sharing of joints. Just the last thing we needed to do was be in Union Square on May 2nd this year. So we lost our event. We also lost our main advertiser, so our sponsor. So we were going to have a hard time putting that event on if people were going to come through and give us money. So in some ways, it kind of gave us a break to kind of reassess for next year, if we'll have one next year, to be honest. I think, life has changed as we know it. COVID's not going away so fast. We might have viruses for years for all we know.
Yeah.
This might be just, we're going to be living with this type of peril for a while. That may extend into next year, which probably will. It may affect our event next year. We may have to really redirect our focus as what are we as an organization if we're not an event organization.
And I mean, it's all speculation, but
we're in a real tough spot right now.
Experts are saying if there is a second wave right now, the projection is April, May. So
yeah,
it'll
be the same thing as this year, as it kind of went into the spring and, continued from winter into spring. I'm no scientist or doctor, but I've been studying this stuff pretty closely. And I'm very proud of New York and New Jersey, what we've done here. I look at the numbers every day and I see the spread in other places. In New York, our numbers are way down. Thank goodness we did it right. Yeah. And I'm still doing it right. I still don't go out much. I still don't socialize. I don't eat out at any of those little curbside places. I'm just not taking chances. It's not that important to me. You've spent 3-4 months trying to protect yourself, and then boom, you just go out and say, screw it. So
pretty much.
What's the point? So for me, I just think we are a good example, like say Italy. Italy's numbers are way down. Germany, where you get a handle on it and it doesn't come back. I'm not saying it's not going to come back in New York later on, but with the COVID spread around the country, it's not coming back here right now. Thank goodness. So we've done a good job. So let's just keep up the good work, and maybe by next spring, things will change. But I'm very proud of the event. I've only been involved the last 3 years. I was, tangentially involved when I was at High Times. I helped out, pitched in, emceed here and there. Then when Doug Green stepped away a few years ago, he didn't want to be on the board anymore, R.I.P. Doug. they asked me to take his place.
Yeah.
And I came in, and the organization really needed a little freshening up. It was really kind of looked like, nothing had changed since 1973 or something. It really was
Yeah.
kind of a little musty. And we needed all kinds of stuff: new logo, new website, new design, new everything. I brought in a lot of new.
Yeah.
And I think we really freshened things up. And, but I think the key to the event is the diversity. It's a great diverse event. It's not like now that, we have tremendous racial struggles in this country, that we're deciding we want to make it a diverse event. It already
Yeah.
is. We
Yeah.
don't we don't have to go and reach out to people of color. They already come to our event and they're part of our event. But what we are going to do is expand our board, so it's a more diverse board. We're working on that right now. Right now, the board is 3 white guys, and that's not okay.
That's
So
great.
we recognize that, and I'm sorry that it takes the death of George Floyd and all the other stuff that's happened lately for us to
Yeah.
open our eyes and for us to wake up a little bit to our own reality.
Sure.
But, all of us, out there, white people, have to really look deep within and realize what they can do to help and
Yeah.
truly be allies, and realize that, maybe they haven't thought about a few things that they could think about. And even I, hadn't thought about that until, I had to think about it and had to realize that, it's not okay.
I
We have to improve our organization. We can't exist like this any longer. So, and we will, we're going to change.
yeah.
We're either going to have a change within our 3, or we're going to expand to 5.
I think that was one of the more useful things to come, and I saw that go around a lot on social, of people calling out to post a picture of your boardroom on social media.
They did?
Yeah, that was a big thing that went around. Like, you want to walk the walk, basically, because every company,
Oh,
same
just
way.
in general. Oh,
Yeah,
just in
like
general.
saying like, oh, you care so much, post a picture of your boardroom, basically implying that it's mostly white males. And I
Well,
think that really made people say, ooh, yeah,
I,
we got
I
it.
will have to say that, I mean, most of my experience in marijuana media, it's been mostly white organizations, white management. I'm part of that. So
Mhm,
I'm perhaps guilty of it too, although I'm not the owner. Generally speaking, I own CelebStoner, but it's just me and a webmaster.
mhm.
It's up to me to make sure that CelebStoner reflects what's happening in society. And
Yeah,
I've been really looking for, articles and content that will discuss these matters, more, and steer the discussion in that direction. I mean, yeah, I'll have some fun with the website about any number of topics, but I'm really looking for things that are appropriate for now, and try to scan around and just, try and, steer the coverage a little bit better. This is what I can do with that. I know with Freedom Leaf and with my magazine that I'm editing now, I can hire more people of color, and I should. So,
awesome.
I'm looking within and realizing there's things that I should be doing that I haven't been doing.
That's really great. Steve, this was amazing. Thank you so much. You're really generous with your time. And I hope soon we can see each other face to face, that it's not going to be forever that we have to stay. But it was really good to catch up with you either way. So
Same here. Same here. We could share a blazing brownie.
yeah, eventually, right? Maybe by the time we get out, it might be legal.
Okay.
So
And good luck to legalization in New Jersey. I
oh, thank
say
you.
that 75% of legalization measures pass, so I really think it'll pass in New Jersey.
Yeah, well, we have 65% popular support.
Yeah.
And there's some money coming into the state now to help really. I think the biggest challenge is going to actually being to get the people who do support it to vote, because we have such uninspiring candidates. I think there's more than ever a lot of people are going to be like, screw it, I don't like either of them. There's a pandemic outside. People get lazy when it comes to mailing a vote, or you don't want to touch a gross voter booth that a million people before you did. I think it might just be low poll turnout that hurts us.
Do a little campaign, vote for weed. Put out a bumper sticker or something. Just people
Wait.
just love to vote for weed. They love to go in the ballot box and go, yes, weed. They love it. So,
Yeah.
and honestly, I do think, okay, I'm not excited about Biden either, but I think generally speaking, people are going to rush to the ballot box to get rid of Trump.
I hope so.
So I can only hope, especially in places like where we live. But
Yeah.
obviously New York's going to vote against Trump. The places that are borderline is where you need to vote against Trump and get him out of office. So it'll
Yeah.
matter more there than it'll matter in a place like Jersey.
Yeah.
Where people are going to, it's not going to take you just need more people to come out and vote, so they'll vote for legalizing weed. But
Yeah.
I think presidential elections, people vote.
Yeah. So
It's the best time to have an initiative on the ballot. I mean, 4 years ago, 8 out of 9 won.
that's
So, I mean,
amazing. Yeah.
Jersey's going to win. Jersey's going to win.
Yeah.
So,
I'm very optimistic.
so yippee for that.
Yay. We beat New York. Haha.
Looks like you're going to. Don't rush
Don't jinx it.
that far.
Knock on
But
wood.
I agree. I agree. You know, well, luckily for you that they have that. You know, within the legislature, you know, they can decide on having a vote and punt it to the voters. You know, New
Yeah.
York wouldn't have that. I didn't know that existed in New Jersey until they did it.
Yeah, well, then it also has to go back to the legislator now and the Cannabis Regulatory Commission to come up with the guidelines. So that
Well,
could
that-
take a really long time.
Right, but at least it gets it going, right? If it's passed, then they have to work.
They
start
have
working.
to do it. Yes,
Right, right.
exactly.
That's
So
exciting. I think that's going to be the big news in November on our end. You know, there's a few other initiatives. Mississippi has medical, I believe, and South Dakota has decrim, which I don't think is going to pass. And or legalization. South Dakota is an unlikely place to pass legalization. So I think, you know, and Arizona may or may not get on the ballot, you know, so I think New Jersey is going to be the big news this November.
yeah, I think we got this. Anything you want to plug? Social media? Anything coming out?
Well, go get my magazines, please. I appreciate it. Go to the stores, try and find it. CBD Guide, CelebStoner.com. Just keep reading and doing your part to make society better.
All right. Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Darren.
Bye.